In this episode, we deal with a reality that shows up in almost every organization, especially as systems move into shared platforms and cloud-like environments. Not every control is built and operated by the team that owns the system you are assessing. Some controls are provided by shared services, common environments, or enterprise teams, and your system relies on them. Those are inherited controls, and documenting them clearly is one of the fastest ways to improve both accuracy and efficiency in compliance work. If you do this poorly, you end up double implementing safeguards, arguing about responsibilities, or failing assessments because you cannot prove that required protections exist. If you do it well, you can show that protections are in place, you can explain who owns what, and you can focus your system-specific effort on what truly needs to be built. The goal here is to help you confidently identify which controls are inherited, describe the inheritance in a way that is testable and defensible, and avoid confusion across shared services and common environments. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at CGRC.Me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. Let's make the concept concrete in plain language. An inherited control is a control requirement that your system satisfies by relying on a capability provided by something outside your direct system boundary, like a corporate identity service, a centralized logging platform, a managed network, a shared data center environment, or a platform team's baseline configuration. Your system inherits the benefit, but another team owns the operation and maintenance of that control. In other words, your system is not building the lock, but it is using a door that already has a lock installed. This is not a loophole, and it is not a shortcut. Frameworks expect this because modern environments are built from layers. A system might inherit physical security from a facility, network segmentation from a shared network team, and authentication from an enterprise directory. The purpose of documenting inheritance is to make those dependencies explicit so assessors and stakeholders can see that the control intent is still being met. The reason inherited controls get messy is that inheritance is rarely all or nothing. Some controls are fully inherited, meaning the shared service provides the complete safeguard and your system team just uses it. Other controls are partially inherited, meaning the shared service covers part of the requirement, but your system still has responsibilities, like configuring options, defining access roles, or monitoring alerts. Still, other controls are common controls, meaning they are implemented once for multiple systems, but each system must show it is included in the scope of that common control. Beginners often make the mistake of labeling a control as inherited without explaining what portion is inherited and what portion remains system-specific. That leads to gaps, because someone assumes the shared team is handling everything when they are not. Clear documentation includes both the inherited portion and the remaining responsibilities, so there is no confusion about who completes the control. To document inherited controls clearly, start with the shared service or common environment and describe it as a provider of specific security capabilities. For example, an enterprise identity service might provide authentication, multi-factor enforcement, account lifecycle processes, and centralized access policy. A centralized logging platform might provide secure log collection, storage, retention, and integrity protections. A managed hosting environment might provide physical security, environmental controls, and some baseline hardening of the underlying infrastructure. Your system then consumes those capabilities, often by integrating with them, routing traffic through them, or being hosted within them. The documentation should name the provider, describe what it provides, and explain how your system uses it. You are building a chain of reasoning that says this control requirement is met because this provider delivers this capability and our system is within its scope. A key part of clarity is defining boundaries and scope for inheritance in a way that lines up with how your organization actually operates. Shared services often have their own scope statements, like which environments are covered, which users are in scope, and what configurations are required for systems to be included. If your system runs in the shared environment only for production but not for development, you might inherit more controls in production than in development, and you need to say that explicitly. If the shared identity service covers employee accounts but not external customer accounts. You might inherit controls for one population, but not the other. If the shared logging platform collects operating system logs automatically, but requires an agent for application logs, then inheritance depends on whether that agent is installed and configured. These details matter because assessors do not just want to hear that a shared service exists. They want to know that your system is actually using it in the required way. Clear inheritance documentation connects the shared service scope to your system scope, rather than assuming the connection is obvious. Another common confusion is mixing inherited controls with dependency statements that are too vague to be useful. Saying authentication is inherited from the enterprise directory does not tell anyone whether multi-factor is enforced, whether privileged accounts are handled differently, whether access reviews occur, or how deprovisioning works. A better approach is to describe inheritance at the level of the control intent, not at the level of a product name. You can explain that authentication and account lifecycle management are provided centrally, including enrollment, deactivation, and policy enforcement, and then state what your system team does, such as mapping roles to groups and requesting access changes through approved processes. This makes the control testable because an assessor can look at evidence from the shared service and evidence from your system integration and confirm they line up. It also reduces the chance that a system team claims inheritance while silently bypassing the shared service, like using local accounts instead of centralized identity. Clarity is less about fancy language and more about describing real behavior. Evidence is the backbone of inherited control documentation, even though you are not turning this into a technical lab exercise. When you say a control is inherited, you should be able to point to at least one authoritative source that shows the shared service implements that control and that your system is included. Evidence might include a shared service control description, a common control provider statement, a platform security baseline document, or an assessment report that covers the shared service. For your system, evidence might include an architecture diagram showing integration, a list of environments and their hosting platforms, or a record that your system is on board to centralized logging. The idea is not to overwhelm people with artifacts, but to demonstrate that inheritance is real, not assumed. In compliance work, assumed inheritance is one of the most common causes of assessment findings because it feels true but cannot be proven. Clear documentation anticipates the evidence question and answers it without drama. It is also important to write inherited control documentation in a way that avoids double counting and avoids accidental gaps. Double counting happens when both the shared service team and the system team claim they implement the same control fully, which can hide the fact that no one actually covers a particular subrequirement. Gaps happen when each team assumes the other is responsible for a piece, like retention settings, alert monitoring, or access approval workflow. A practical way to avoid both problems is to explicitly state the owner for the control and then list what that owner does, followed by what the system team must do to remain compliant. Ownership does not mean the system team has no accountability. It means there is a clear operator responsible for the shared capability. Then the system team's responsibilities are framed as integration and usage requirements, like enabling certain features, ensuring correct configuration, or responding to alerts. This style makes responsibility boundaries visible, which is exactly what auditors and risk owners need. Shared services also introduce the concept of inherited risk, and beginners sometimes miss that. If your system relies on a common environment for security, and that environment has weaknesses or outages, your system inherits those weaknesses and outages too. Documenting inherited controls is not only about claiming credit for protections, it is also about acknowledging dependencies. For example, if centralized authentication goes down, your system might lose availability because users cannot log in. If centralized logging is misconfigured, you might lose detection capability. If the hosting platform has a vulnerability, your system might be exposed even if your application code is clean. When you document inherited controls, you can also note key assumptions and dependencies, such as service availability expectations and required integration behaviors. You are not writing a threat model, but you are capturing the reality that shared services are part of your system's risk picture. Good governance includes stating what you depend on, not just what you control. A particularly tricky area is inherited controls in hybrid or shared environments where different parts of the system are hosted in different places. You might have a front-end component in one environment, a database in another, and third-party services handling notifications or analytics. Inheritance can differ across components, and if you document it as if the whole system is uniform, you can create hidden gaps. For example, you might inherit network protections in one environment, but not in another, or you might inherit backup services for one data store, but not for another. The way to handle this clearly is to tie inherited controls to the relevant system components and environments, even if you keep the language high level. You can state that production components hosted in the enterprise environment inherit physical security and baseline network protections, while external services have separate assurances and require contract and vendor management controls. This keeps your documentation aligned with reality and prevents the system from being treated as a single box when it is actually a set of connected parts. You also want your inherited control documentation to be understandable by people who are not deep in the infrastructure details. That means focusing on what the shared service does, how it supports the control intent, and what the system team must do to stay within that coverage. If you use too much platform-specific language, you will lose business stakeholders, and you may also lock your documentation to a particular technology that could change. Instead, describe capabilities like centralized identity, centralized logging, managed network boundaries, secure hosting, and enterprise patching, and then explain how your system is connected to those capabilities. This keeps the documentation durable, which matters because audits and assessments often occur long after the original system build. The clearer and more stable your inherited control story is, the less rework you will have when the environment evolves. By the end of this lesson, the main skill is that you can document inherited controls clearly across shared services and common environments in a way that is testable, defensible, and free of confusion. You can define what is inherited, what is partially inherited, and what remains system-specific, and you can describe scope and ownership so there are no hidden gaps. You understand that inheritance is both a benefit and a dependency, and you can explain how shared capabilities support baseline requirements without claiming more than is true. This clarity sets you up for the next step, which is determining applicability and avoiding double counting across baseline and inherited controls. When inherited controls are documented well, control selection becomes cleaner, assessments become smoother, and the organization spends effort where it actually matters instead of rebuilding safeguards that already exist.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit DailyCyber.News.